Well, good morning or good afternoon to all of you, depending on which time zone you're in. Thanks for being here today. My name is Dr. Heidi A. Rockland, and I would like to present to you my paper on growth in practice, teachers' reaction to supported change. So I want to jump right into the novel teaching strategy of intentional grouping that I studied, that was really central to the study that I completed. As is shown here, the IG model, intentional grouping model, blends student-centered and teacher-directed instruction and also incorporates the assessment response cycle to create a classroom that responds to the needs at the correct level of difficulty for each student. Sorry, I had to move something out of the way there. The IG model incorporates both small group and whole group instruction while repeatedly using data to inform instruction. The flow of the IG classroom is shown here. As you can see, the assessment response cycle incorporates the assessment types working in harmony to take the complete picture of student growth and achievement in order to inform instruction and break down instruction into appropriate levels for students. After students experience this cycle of targeted assessment and response, the scenario repeats itself over and over in a seamless flow of learning and feedback. I'd like to take a moment to focus on or zoom into the assessment portion of the classroom flow. Here, we're taking a closer look at the types of assessment that are used in the IG instructional strategy. This slide illustrates how the types of assessment work together and when used in harmony, create a complete picture of student growth and achievement. These assessments are critical to the proper flow of an IG classroom. So, in order for teachers to become familiar with the IG instructional strategy, the schedule shown here was used to present professional development to teachers. After taking a series of pre-assessments and surveys, participants then began the professional development series. Sessions focused on different aspects of IG-based instruction each time and consisted of training sessions, activities, role play, and sharing of ideas and artifacts among participants. All sessions were presented via Zoom and all activities were housed on Google Classroom. The participants engaged in learning about productive and unproductive beliefs in mathematics and were exposed to the work of the NCTM, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. Participants were taught how to look at data, how to use the data from assessments that were already in place in their classrooms. The presenters also addressed how to create effective small groups and respond to student needs in that small group setting. Finally, participants engaged in sharing of best practices for classroom management for this style of instruction. There were 11 participants and they were present for all of the sessions. They were an extremely dedicated group of teachers that I was privileged to work with. These professional development sessions were offered exclusively in online formats due to the COVID-19 crisis that hit the United States in March of 2020. The timeline of the study is shown on the next slide to give you some context. So as you can see, COVID-19 hit this study hard. I know I was not alone, but when the COVID-19 pandemic hit the United States and the world, education as we know it was turned upside down. Students were forced overnight into online learning. Teachers were thrown into an unknown, seemingly disconnected world. Administrators like me were tasked with taking brick and mortar school districts and turning them into institutions of online learning in mere days. In addition, educational researchers, also like me, were forced to modify their studies to work around the complete shutdown of schools. But my study survived, I'm happy to say, and pressed on. One of the major effects of the COVID crisis to my study was the loss of the ability to observe live classrooms in order to measure the degree of application of the concepts that I was teaching during the treatment or professional development series. These live observations were replaced with self-assessments completed by participants. Another major alteration to my study was that all of the professional development series had to be delivered online via Zoom or Google Classroom. I'd like now to talk through the assessments that I gave for the purpose of my study and the results of those assessments. But before I do get into those assessment results and conclusions of the study, I'd like to take a minute to talk about what the ultimate goal of this research was. It was really twofold. I wanted to give teachers education about a sound instructional strategy that could immediately help their practice in the classroom. I also wanted to see if the professional development offered to teachers, specifically by me and my team, was effective, at least in the short term, in improving practice and, more importantly, the mindset of teachers. So my study began by administering a series of pre-assessments to the participants and then concluded with administration of the same surveys and assessments, with the exception of the propensity to trust survey. The surveys and assessments are listed here, and each had a specific purpose tied to the research questions that were posed by this study. All of the surveys utilized a 7-point Likert type scale, with the exception of the IG-based content knowledge assessment, which used a binary scale, with answers coded as 0 for incorrect and 1 for correct responses. I want to particularly point out and talk about the teacher beliefs about mathematics survey, because I feel it is the most interesting survey that was part of the study and provided what I would call hope for the flexibility of thought so crucial to education. This survey was given, and as you can see, the questions are aligned to the NCTM's productive versus unproductive mathematical beliefs. I gave this survey to gauge teachers' beliefs and buy-in to this instructional strategy. In many places in the United States, the ideas outlined by the NCTM are still considered radical. It is my educational mission to make mathematics classrooms open and accepting places for children, and one of these ways is to educate teachers of productive mathematical beliefs. As you will see from the results of my study, I think I have at least made a minor dent. The results of the self-assessment of practice, pre and post test scores, are shown here. As you can see, participants grew in their application and practice across each question. At this point, seeing that there did seem to be a significant change in teachers' application to practice, I calculated the effect size using Cohen's d. These results brought me to the following conclusion. And as you can read here, there was a large overall effect in response to application to practice. The extent of change, the effect size was measured as 1.499. I could conclude from this analysis that a significant effect was observed on teacher practice as reported by the self-assessment. So did teachers take what they had learned and then apply it to their classrooms? Here's a graphical summary of the results shown for increasing buy-in and growing mindset. These results from the teacher beliefs about mathematics instruction survey also show an overall change in teacher self-reported buy-in. 2 questions on the survey, 1A and 2I, seem to show a decrease in participant mean score, but this decrease is actually a growth in beliefs, since these questions address the level to which a student needs to be explicitly taught formulas and procedures in mathematics classrooms. But since the study was only looking for an extent of change, any change in score would register in effect size and correlation calculations. So in terms of increasing buy-in and growing mindset, a large effect was also observed. The effect size was calculated as 1.839, and from this analysis, I could again conclude that there was a significant impact on teacher beliefs and buy-in after participating in this professional development series. Shown here are the pre and post-test results from the IG-based knowledge test given to participants both before and after the professional development series. You can see that all participants showed positive growth in their knowledge, and the extent to which their score changed from the pre-test to the post-test is also shown here. You can see that all participants made significant gains in their score after learning about the IG strategy, which would be expected. So in looking at these results, the IG-based content knowledge assessment yielded the largest effect size. This assessment assessed the retention of knowledge and concepts presented during the professional development series. This analysis of results also allowed me to conclude that, to a large extent, teachers did retain knowledge from the professional development series that was offered. I then used the ANOVA test to examine any interaction effect between survey and assessment questions with the participant group for each of the survey and assessment instruments. As you know, ANOVA testing can identify the influence of one independent variable on the other independent variable within an experiment. I used the ANOVA testing to look for significant differences between participant responses. Across each survey and assessment, 4 questions were identified to be significantly different across the sample as compared to the mean. Significance was determined at the 0.05 level. As you can see in the table on this slide, 3 of the 4 questions come from the teacher beliefs survey. This may indicate a weakness in the testing instrument, but also the significance level may have been affected adversely by the small sample size of this study. It was n equals 11, and may have yielded different results if the participant group had been larger. This analysis is provided so that all of you can remain informed about the reliability of the instruments that were used during this study. Finally, the propensity to trust scale was included in this study so that I could begin to analyze any correlation that might exist between a participant's propensity to trust and the other study variables. But it was not specifically tied to any of my research questions. The results are shown here. The use of correlational analysis provided me with the ability to examine the influence that one variable had on another variable. The correlations investigated, all listed here, were investigated to draw conclusions and explore relationships that may have existed within the study. I was interested to see if any relationship existed between a participant's propensity to trust and their change in score on the content knowledge assessment, the possibility of a relationship between a change in a participant's score on the content knowledge assessment and the change in score on the belief survey, and finally, the possibility that a relationship would exist between a participant's change in score on the self-assessment of practice and their change in score on the content knowledge assessment. So all of these the Pearson correlation analyses were completed using SPSS software. And the Pearson correlation coefficient measures the strength of association between 2 variables. This data were analyzed using the 2-tailed test model to measure for statistically significant correlations at both the 0.05 and 0.01 levels. Although small correlations were discovered between the variables, no statistically significant correlations were found when testing at both of these levels. This data was somewhat disappointing for me, and correlation data may have been affected by the small sample size again. I was hoping to draw the above correlations, either positive or negative, in the categories above to further explore the nature of the effect of the relationship between participant and presenter, learning and application, and beliefs and knowledge. But in this particular study, I was unable to do so. So my overall interpretation of my results indicates that there is an increase in application of concepts, buy-in, and content knowledge after participating in this particular PD series. There's no statistically significant correlation that exists between multiple study factors, and that the small sample size may have been a causal factor in the lack of statistically significant correlations and may have allowed for greater deviations from the mean, which would have nullified my significance. Excuse me. Finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the conclusions and recommendations that came out of this study. So the self-assessment given in response to the guiding question for application of practice was broken into 3 areas of instructional practice: management, instructional delivery, and engagement. Within these categories, participants showed the most growth in instructional practice within management and instructional delivery. Classroom management and organization is essential to an IG or any classroom. This competency was addressed only in the final PD session. Participants may have benefited more if this had been addressed throughout the entire professional development series. The competency of instructional delivery, while also showing significant growth, must be taken into the context of this self-reporting instrument. To decisively say that teacher instructional delivery was truly impacted by this PD series, classroom observations must take place. While impossible to accomplish during this study, due to the COVID-19 shutdown, it did open the door for further research in this area. When analyzing the responses from the surveys, the most significant growth in beliefs and therefore buy-in was observed in two areas: collecting data to inform instruction and facilitating purposeful mathematical discussions. Because of the integral role assessment plays in the IG strategy, the professional development series offered sessions that included the role of assessments and the use of data in every session, with the exception of the final session. The emphasis placed on this topic may have played a role in the significant shift in teacher mindset, beliefs, and buy-in associated with assessment. When grouping students in an IG classroom, students must be able to engage their peers in mathematical discussions. Teachers must be prepared to guide and spur discussions within the classroom environment. Without a firm belief in the importance of mathematical discussion, the IG instructional strategy has the potential to fall back into a teacher-led model of instruction. Even though the professional development series did not emphasize this productive mathematical belief more or less than any other, the participant group showed immense growth in this area. However, the increase in teacher buy-in in this area may have been due to the fact that this area was rated the lowest on the pre-assessment and therefore had the most room for growth. So the extent to which teachers retained knowledge of concepts presented during the IG professional development series was measured by a content knowledge assessment given once before the PD series began and then following the final session. 100% of the participants increased their score on the knowledge assessment, indicating that the concepts presented were retained through the duration of the series. While this increase was expected, the researcher anticipated that all participants would have scored consistently higher on the post-assessment. The mean score on the post-assessment was a 15.8 out of a possible 17 points, which correlates to a 93% accuracy rate. I expected a mean post-assessment score of 16.15, which would have correlated to a 95% accuracy rate. There is a possibility that the participants in this study may not retain the knowledge over an extended period of time. This possibility could also be explored as a topic for further research.